soul. God, get at your boy. You try to poke God, fall back. I go hard on this lonely road, trying to make it home. Doing it by my lonesome pissed off flow song.
I see them long, hard times to come.
We were lucky during the last flu pandemic that the available stockpiles of antivirals were effective. Dimitar Tonev, UK Medical Director of Virology, Bristol-Myers Squibb. Good afternoon and welcome to London Real. My name is Brian Rose. With me, as usual, is Mr. Nick Gabriel. And joining us in studio today is our special guest, Dimitar Tonev, who is, well, we'll go back to his title soon. He's either the disease area head of virology at Bristol-Myers Squibb, or as you said earlier,
a medical director of virology for the UK.
Okay, medical director of virology for the UK. Wow is all I have to say. I think, well, okay, you're definitely a very unique guest. So we're going to get to you soon. Dimitar has just taken some alpha brain, but he is quick to note that it has not been proven in clinical trials, and so we'll have to get that done, right?
Yeah. When he calls you tomorrow saying, I had the most amazing dream, we'll pop it up on the show.
That's not good enough, right? We actually need a clinical trial.
Fair enough.
But that's, of course, Alpha Brain's provided by Onnit Labs, who are our partner in crime. And if you go to onnit.com, that's ONNIT, for the people listening to us on iTunes, and type in London Real as a customer code, you can get Alpha Brain 10% off. Also, Shroom Tech Sport. I've been taking it now for 2 days before my workouts with the cordyceps mushrooms. I like it. I still want to keep trying it. And also the Shroom Tech Immune, just to help your immune system out. So check all those products out. Nick has just taken all of them just now, so we're just going to have to keep an eye on him.
Yeah, it's a little low sample rate clinical trial, right?
Yeah, it is the low sample rate. We actually had a couple conversations off camera that I wish we had taped with Dimitar so far. But I guess I'm going to go to leave it over to you, Nick, to introduce our guest.
Yeah, Dimitar, first of all, I'm happy to meet you. I don't think we've ever had someone with such a high academic qualification in here, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
We had an economist, but, you know, this is different.
Yeah, this is... I mean, your field of expertise, I know next to nothing about, but it does interest me. Could you tell us, I guess, one of the things you find interesting about working in virology?
Yeah, you know, I've just been to a lecture yesterday in Royal Free Hospital when the guy, really a great guy that was responsible for this lecture, mentioned that most of the students during the first years of their training will develop some kind of affection for virology and viruses in general, purely because they're very, very interesting, and the, you know, background science is amazing. And second, unfortunately, they're still responsible for loads of deaths worldwide. So it's a kind of a natural challenge to try to avoid this deadly, to try to combat and, you know, to win against this deadly enemy. And of course, you've seen movies like Contagion recently, when all these guys are working in a space shuttle costumes, which is really amazing. So probably during the initial years of training, we believe wrongly that virology means this type of amazing work, saving lives and risking your own. It's not that sexy at the end of the day, but it's still amazing science, and it's still very, very important from social perspective.
Okay. So it's almost so virology is almost catchy like a virus.
Yeah, in a sense. Yeah.
Did you see Contagion?
Man, I tried to watch it, and it got to the scene where they were sewing open the Gwyneth Paltrow's head, and I'm just like, don't really feel like watching this.
Really?
Man, I'm a bit squeamish.
Okay, it's an interesting movie because it was a lot like a movie called Babel that came out about 3 years ago, where you've got the characters don't really interact with each other in the movie. It's kind of like you've got these semi-isolated things happening, and there's not a natural plot arc that you're used to in movies. So at Steven Soderbergh, I mean, he's a genius and also
cool,
crazy. But
did you ever watch Traffic?
I did, yeah.
It was a cool
I mean,
one
I had
as
this
well.
time on that. But what did you watched it? Yes. Has everyone in your field seen it?
Yeah, and we found it to be very realistic in terms of what might have been the normal reaction of institutions like the one they've mentioned, or countries in terms of United States, if the threat is really that serious. We've been close to this, if you remember the general kind of chaotic behavior during the initial phases of swine flu pandemic. H1. Yeah, so we were really lucky that the virus was not that dangerous in general.
In Hong Kong, they did some quarantines and some cullings, didn't they?
Yeah, actually, it started in Mexico. So the first affected country was United States, specifically California, and of course the United States CDC identified the virus first. But it's just the last of the many pandemics and the least deadly one. You probably remember the previous SARS drama that started in Hong Kong, but ended up being quite a big threat for a Canadian healthcare system and many others.
Because it went from Hong Kong straight to Canada first. Okay. Yeah. That was what, 2008?
It was,
or 6?
No, it was probably around 10 years ago.
Okay.
And then there were some cases of bird flu, which is really more or less the kind of a background scare behind Contagion. Because it was related to birds and the movie as well. So it's always, this threat will be always around us, unfortunately.
I always hear people making reference to the flu epidemic of like 1911 or 1918 or 1917 in the United States that killed millions, or worldwide. Or is that something you guys always look to as a base to make a comparison? Or
it is, yeah, it is amazing story. You know, in the history of medicine, probably we've never faced anything that big and that dangerous that killed in excess of 50 million guys.
50,
and based on some estimations, probably even 100. It's difficult to understand because most of the victims are soldiers. So during the First World War, it came in 3 different waves, and it's almost impossible to identify how many of these guys were killed by the virus, how many are killed by the other related to the very essence of war, other health conditions. So it's difficult to really understand, but it's an amazing piece of science. I don't know, it's a little known fact, but there are really impressive physicians here in this country. And I would like to name one of these guys, Professor John Oxford, that went all the way up to Alaska to dig the remains of a couple of miners that died during the great Spanish flu pandemic in order to identify the virus based on these very few pieces of flesh remaining on this corpse in a permafrost.
Wow. Is that dangerous at all?
Probably this is not something that put their life in danger, but I did something amazing for the sake of science, and it's a really interesting story. But it's probably not our main topic for
it's
today.
interesting though. How did that pandemic, it's called a pandemic, is that right? How did that die out? There was no, or did it kill itself out?
It's in general, the viruses are very quickly changeable in terms of their own kind of ability to kill humans. So most of the pandemics are coming in a couple of different waves year after year, and the virus comes in a relatively changed genotype and phenotype. And luckily for us, meanwhile, we are better and better prepared, and the virus is less and less, ideally, of course, able to kill us. But in general, it's a natural process of kind of dying out.
And it mutates into something else
with the time. Yeah, wow. It's in general, it's the ability of the virus to really cause harm. It's based on a couple of factors, specifically speaking about pandemic influenza, which is an acute viral disease. Most of the other topics that we'll be covering are chronic viral diseases. This one is acute viral disease. So it's all about the specific type of the virus and whether humankind in general have met this virus previously, therefore being able to respond with the production of antibodies to neutralize this danger.
That's an acute.
So the worst virus would be a relatively new virus that we've never met before, therefore we are not prepared. Second, would be not only unique in terms of genetic material, but would be really viable to delete fast and, travel across quite successfully, which means stable outside of the host body. Regardless of whether we are speaking here about humans or other hosts like birds or rodents or whatever. So if it's new, if it's dangerous, and if it's able to survive outside of the host, therefore able to travel distances, it's really...
So those three characteristics will define something as an acute as opposed to chronic.
Acute threat to humankind. And no, the difference between acute and chronic infection is actually based on the duration of this infection. Let's say for something which is quite fashionable these days, like hepatitis C, if the body was not able to kind of overcome the infection in 6 months, the victory over infection most of the time means the creation of antibodies against the specific viral antigens. So if the body was not able to overcome this in 6 months, the infection is officially chronic one.
Oh, I see.
And could go on for other 20, 30 years, gradually developing some kind of specific, let's say, complications, which would be based on the organ localization of the virus.
Does that mean that if it takes a long time to actually kill someone, does it also mean that that person can now spread it onto other people because they're not dying quickly? And is it more dangerous sometimes?
Unfortunately, yeah. If you have this viral replicating in your body, most of the time you're able to transmit this virus to others via different routes based on the typical characteristics of this virus. Exactly the same applies for acute viral infection, unfortunately, because you remember quite well the recommendations that were coming from the government and Health Protection Agency during the beginning of swine flu pandemic, like to increase the to decrease the social contact,
wash your hands.
They would be really tempted most of the time to close schools because this was proven effective in previous pandemics. So less contact between humans, kind of decreasing, at least theoretically, the likelihood of this virus to spread.
So I have a question for you, Dimitar. Do you think the reason we haven't seen something on the same scale as something like the bubonic plague is because of the fact that we have these far more complex and effective national health organizations and global health organizations? Do you think that that's the only thing that's prevented this from happening since they used to take place like hundreds of years ago?
To a large extent, yeah. The guys in this organization like WHO or CCDS are doing a huge amount of work, not only to kind of quickly identify the virus in circulation or to prepare us in terms of eventually submitting the identified by them viral characteristic to the manufacturers of vaccines, but they're actually trying effectively to predict what kind of virus we will be eventually facing in the next flu season. That's something which they're doing on a regular basis. The likelihood of them being exact is very high, but it's of course not always there.
So I have another question. Let's say in the history of our species, let's say science had never come to the forefront, or science didn't exist, and we had no pathology or immunology. How do you say that? Immunology?
Immunology?
Yeah, or virology, or no medicine. Do you think our species would have made it this far? Do you think we would have become extinct due to some kind of epidemic or pathogen or something like that?
I mean, you mean without the proper healthcare?
For let's say healthcare did not exist.
Scientific method,
yeah,
I mean, even
the scientific method. Do you think, like, if cavemen, or if we had never progressed beyond the Stone Age, do you think ultimately we'd still have gotten here and our immune systems would have done the job and produced the antibodies that were required to keep replicating, or do you think the species would have just been wiped out totally by some sort of?
It's really difficult to predict what could have been, but you know, it's on a couple of occasions in history, you know, that almost entire nations were killed by something which is not that dangerous in terms of pathogen, and we've never actually proven, but there are some suspicions that, let's say, Inca's empire was largely killed by disease, which Spanish conquistadors kind of unintentionally transferred to South
generally
America.
Accepted these days?
I think so, but I've never seen a real good proofs like the ones John Oxford brought from Alaska many years ago.
Okay. I mean, the whole, if you've ever read Guns, Germs, and Steel, have you read that book?
No.
Yeah, I gave Nick a copy, but he lost it, I think. And he talks about how his question was, how come the Spanish landed on the Incas' doorstep and killed them? Why didn't the Incas land on the Spain's doorstep and kill all of them? And his argument goes that all the technology started in Mesopotamia, and then people got to the division of labor, and then once you have a division of labor, you can get specialists, and then you can have, you know, a guy that specializes in making guns or making horseback riding or that kind of thing. Also, he said the cohabitation with the animals allowed the mutation of a lot of viruses. And just by having sheep and all these domesticated animals, they brought all of these viruses that they built up an immune system to. And then when they went over to South America, these people had never dealt with these strains, had never lived with these animals, and couldn't deal with these diseases. And that's his theory.
That's an interesting theory.
What do you think about that?
It's interesting. It's difficult really to predict whether a civilization, the natural development of civilization in a certain extent will by all means be related to development of some kind of healthcare. And we hear rumors, and some of us are, let's say, even believers that the healthcare in Egyptian empire, at least for a dominant casta, was really very good.
They were performing eye surgery.
Yeah, and the same goes for, let's say, for Arabian famous physicians like Avicenna, which actually are considered as the creators of modern medicine. So there are types of civilizations that were related to a really well-established medical care. I'm not so sure about Incas, but given that we are still scared by their calendar, supposedly they have had
I'm not scared by their calendar.
They have had some kind of successes in medicine as well. But that's being said, they were definitely not prepared for this type of most probably viral disease or kind of bacterial disease that came with conquistador, like kind of obligatory pathogens, meaning they obviously lived in conquistador bodies, unable to kill them because they have had developed some kind of immune response against them through the years. But unprepared local population, indigenous population, was really not prepared at all.
I mean, if you were an Inca population and these guys showed up and just everyone started dying around you, I mean, not from, sword wounds, but just from the presence of them, and you didn't understand disease, how much of a mind fuck would that be? These guys show up and you die. I mean, seriously, if someone just showed up and said, "Hey, how are you, Nick?" and then tomorrow you die because he touched you, I mean, they would be a god or a devil or...
Probably not that quickly, but
still weeks.
When I speak or interact with someone like this, or when I think about healthcare and virology and all these kind of things, what becomes clearest to me is how fragile we are, man. And just to make it to I'm 32, you're 40, and how old are you, Dimitar?
44.
Okay, just to make it to these ages, with all these things that can go wrong, it's just, you have to be grateful, man. It's amazing.
Is average lifespan being increased over the last 50 years or 100 years? I mean, I guess that has a lot to do with what you do, right? Or what your company does.
In general, no, I can't really took this credit, but in general, I guess the development of healthcare and development of science is really the most important factor. At the same time, loads of other developments related to civilization in general, like, better food in a certain extent, better, kind of facilities and conditions for elderly people and so on and so on. It's really a multifactorial, complex reason.
There was recently something that was announced in the papers, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. I don't know enough about it, but apparently in the laboratory they had created an airborne virus that was extremely dangerous, and I wish I had more details about it. And they've actually just suspended work on it for 60 days, which is something they haven't done before. But they created some type of highly contagious airborne virus that could, transmit between humans, something maybe along the lines of the movie. And then there was a big outcry as saying that there's no way you can keep that in a lab, that there's a very likelihood it will get out of that lab, and if it does, we'll have a major problem on our hands. Is that something that, how should that be dealt with, in your opinion?
There are, don't know about this virus specifically, and of course there are thousands of deadly viruses which are investigated actively, and of course, whichever is the institution is keeping them under really solid control. There are lots of procedure and different layers of security and safety, which applies to real dangerous viruses. But in general, it's always a possibility. We believe that with the end of the Cold War, there is no substantial investments nowadays in development of bacteriological kind of weaponry.
Okay.
But
wouldn't that take a significant investment? I know we were talking about Tim Ferriss, you know, author of The 4-Hour Workweek and The 4-Hour Body, and he's got a lot of chums that he has in Silicon Valley. Some of them are in pharmaceutical companies, and he mentioned on a podcast that one of the guys said, "Give me a few $1 billion in
40 2 weeks." He said
2 weeks and 40 of my guys, and I will create a virus that can wipe out the planet. You think he's being a bit cavalier?
it's probably an over-optimistic view, and hopefully this will never happen.
Yeah.
But with the proper funding, of course, lots of things could be created or further developed. And actually, there is no need for the humankind to do this, because viruses are doing this themselves. Once again, referring to this famous movie from last year. You could see this.
I mean, millions and millions of people were dying, right? I mean, like 50, 100 million. It was just like 20% of the American population was dead. Wow. People were fighting over the vaccine. You know, it was assigned by the day of your birth. So it's like, okay, if you're born April 2nd, you have to wait until then to get it. I mean, it was really, we are going to see something like that in the next 40 years or in our lifetime, or will we?
It's hopefully won't be that bad, and hopefully we'll be better prepared. But in terms of, let's say, what have happened in this country a couple of years ago, it was always a kind of a well-established strategy for the British government how to react in this kind of situations. And because they knew for sure that they will need at least 6 months, and 6 months it's probably very optimistic, to develop a vaccine.
Yeah.
Since the first, in the identification of the virus, they logically wanted to create some kind of an antiviral pool of antiviral medicine that could actually delay the transmission of this virus in the population, or kind of keep patients or all of us under relatively protected umbrella during this period of time they need to prepare the vaccine. The question is that all of the antivirals are created and driven by a specific genetic determinants of the virus. So if the virus is slightly changed or mutated virus, this virus might not be really influenced by these antivirals. We were lucky during the last pandemic that the available, let's say, stockpiles of antivirals were effective against the virus.
They were.
For the last pandemic, yeah. And hopefully this will be always the case, but definitely in terms of influenza specifically, there is a need, I guess, for more research and more antivirals, because we have only two preparations available.
Two?
Only two, yeah.
As in two?
Like two different molecules. They are all neuraminidase inhibitors, so we need something more.
So these are those two are generalized for viral vaccination?
For flu specifically.
Flu. Okay.
Flu, okay.
We're coming back to flu.
Is that the most dangerous and the most likely?
The most likely to cause probably this type of dramas like the ones described in Contagion.
I'm always curious, like when you see a movie like that, you got like the WHO, which is a organization, and then you've got a pharmaceutical company like you, which are a for-profit corporation. I mean, they can't call you up and say, start producing this, this retroviral, whatever it is, this medicine.
Or can they?
Or can they? What is your relationship with them?
I mean,
it's a good question.
It was always a very well established relationship. I'm currently not working in this environment, but in general, I've already mentioned that WHO is identifying well in advance the circulating types of flu virus for the next flu season. So they will do this during this North Hemisphere summer, in order for the population to be prepared for the, let's say, autumn normal peaks in flu activity. So this kind of cooperation between vaccine producers and World Health Organizations of any type, it's well established and it's working really well. It's a kind of a normal seasonal virus, which we will be facing, and this virus could cause some damage and definitely, unfortunately, will kill elderly people or people with other chronic diseases. The pandemic types of virus are slightly different, but in general, the cooperation exists and will be equally effective and very much important in terms of potential damage of this type of pandemic viruses.
I always find it really fascinating how, how science has just changed the game like completely when it comes to natural selection, and it's just completely rewritten the rules. A lot of us probably wouldn't. It comes back to what I was saying earlier. We probably wouldn't be here if we hadn't received some vaccination when we were a kid, or You know, how many times have we been really sick and had to go to the doctor and been prescribed something that's probably ultimately saved our lives?
Right, even antibiotics.
And exactly.
Something simple like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to fathom. So your work is mostly with hepatitis B and C, or what are your big challenges, or what are the things that interest you most right now?
Yeah, currently, my company is. I guess we should mention that I'm working for BMS, and regardless of this, of course, all the opinions expressed here are my own,
Okay.
and not necessarily BMS.
Can you tell us about BMS as far as?
So BMS is a well-known and substantial player in against viral disease. It's let's say one of the classical, well-established American pharmaceutical companies.
Stands for Bristol-Myers
Squibb.
Okay.
Yeah, preparing medication and developing new products in HIV, hepatitis C, and hepatitis B. So that's the three types of viruses related to a substantial chronic viral disease with a kind of very, very substantial healthcare outcomes.
Do those diseases have the most market share? I mean, do those affect the most people in the worst ways?
Yeah, just a couple of probably figures, you know, in order to understand the magnitude of the problem. The world population that lives with hepatitis B virus is around 300 million.
Wow.
Same figure for hepatitis C is around, all these figures are approximate, of course, are 170 millions. And we believe that around 35 millions live with HIV.
Okay.
And there's, you know what I find fascinating is how malaria it's like such a huge killer and we never hear anything about it. You know, apparently this is something I saw on the tube. A child dies every 45 seconds from malaria, which is, and malaria's been around for a long time, you know. And
it's awful. It's really, the statistics are kind of really impressive in a negative way, and sometimes something really simple like a mosquito net could save lives,
right.
Actually millions of lives in sub-Saharan Africa. Same applies to HIV virus, which is still killing something like 2.5 million people per year. And most of these deaths, avoidable deaths, are in sub-Saharan Africa.
Is it avoidable because of medication or because of preventative behavior?
Yeah, because in both cases, this is a reasonable way to prevent this, and medication is available definitely nowadays. HIV is a chronic disease. Nobody should really die from HIV if diagnosed and treatment is started.
This is mainly in South Africa, right? And Botswana and sub-Saharan Africa is where the biggest problem is, right?
Lots of countries from this area. South Africa actually did major improvements. They were famous historically many years ago with a movement called HIV denialism.
Yeah.
When some kind of prominent political figures were mentioning and actually defending the understanding that the virus is not causing the illness or deaths.
You're from South Africa. Can you shed any perspective on that? Because I know the head minister said take a shower or something.
What happened
eat
is,
vegetables.
Or eat vegetables.
Yeah, this guy, he's the Jacob Zuma, who's the current president of the country, I'm ashamed to say. It's my understanding, and I don't really follow South African politics much anymore, but it's my understanding that he slept with some woman, and there was some HIV scare or something, and he just said, no, it's fine because I took a shower afterwards.
Right.
And that kind of like, that revealed his complete lack of understanding.
And then the health minister said something like eat more vegetables.
Yeah.
And then recently he's gone in and actually taken an HIV test. So I think he's actually gone a 180 another. They're starting to recognize it.
What we are describing now was really 10 years ago, and it was really not something to be specifically proud of. But now I guess they're moving forward. They have a well-established healthcare system. They are providing HIV medications to the vast majority of the population. So South Africa is probably the best example how things could change quite quickly. And
Have you been to a place like that where? Like a third world country, and have you worked like on the ground, if you know what I mean? Because I can imagine that what you do is quite, I don't want to say sanitized, but you're sitting in a lab in a first world country with all the resources at your fingertips. I'd like to know your findings. Have you ever been to a place like that?
No, personally no. I have a colleague, we are working with a guy that was previously responsible for establishing, let's say, of the HIV healthcare system in Barbados.
Okay.
And he knows lots about, a great deal about West Africa and what's the situation in these countries. Another physician that I'm working with from Royal Free is actually working very, very closely with Ugandan professionals, healthcare professionals.
Okay.
So that's my sources of information. And the situation is getting better, but it's not that good anyway. I remember, let's say, the first years of HIV treatment in Eastern Europe, type of countries which I'm really well familiar with.
You're from Bulgaria.
Yeah, specifically
I'd
my
like to
own.
ask you more about that in a minute, but please continue.
Yeah, and I could only share some experiences from this type of countries, which are fortunately not with that impressive prevalence and incidence of HIV, but on the other hand, definitely initially healthcare system didn't respond in the best possible way. So
Why is that? Is that
this is
because they were considered intravenous drug users or a homosexual population? Do you think there was just a kind of a ignorance or a shunning?
Yeah, without being officially mentioned, of course, for a very understandable reason, there were some attempts to criminalize intravenous drug use and therefore to restrict funding for, let's say, reimbursement of medications which were readily available for HIV.
And that alone, that
But
financial
we're-
commitment can kill people, right?
Yeah, but we're definitely Russian coming from typical, let's say, pharmacoeffectiveness perspective. Let's say what's cheaper, not what's better, but what's cheaper. And for a number of years, you probably remember the example of Ukraine, when before the changes, all these countries were officially with a very small minority of positive HIV positive patients.
Okay.
And after the changes, let's say in Ukraine, this is probably the most impressive example, figures exploded because there was no iron curtain, there was no government control, and loads of real facts became, available to the public and scientific community.
It's fascinating how it's so cultural, just something like that, whether it's in Africa or in Eastern Europe.
Maybe like changing up the topic just a little bit, what do you think, you're obviously a very intelligent individual, I'd like to know what would you be doing if you weren't a virologist?
Don't know, I definitely came from non-medical background. My father was a professor of history. My mother was dealing with reliability and generally electronical kind of devices. So none of my parents was really a medic. So I've always considered this type of development to be something of major interest. If it was not virology, it might have been probably gastroenterology. I did some kind of research earlier in gastroenterology, and it's still very much important. And in general, let's say, viral disease like hepatitis is very much related to gastroenterology and hepatology specifically, because the bigger damage will be to your liver, and actually what will kill most of the patients if they're not treated successfully will be a liver failure.
Is this for hepatitis B and C?
Speaking about hepatitis B
Can you
and
talk
C.
about the difference between those two and how dangerous they are and the transmittability? I mean, I just always hear hepatitis C is serious, but I don't know the difference. I don't even know much about them.
Me neither.
It's really a different type of viruses, and it's a well-established fact that hepatitis B virus is much more clever and kind of difficult to combat, and really causing probably more problems in the long run. It was never a virus of specific importance for UK traditionally. The overall kind of prevalence is 0.3%. There are no that good or very credible official data, because the last Health Protection Agency's report is from 2013. While preparing for this conversation, I've tried to find some more recent data. There is no any. So
when you said it's a much cleverer virus, I found that was interesting. I mean, is that just with regard to its mutatability, or
they all mutate very, very frequently, and they are all able to produce billions and zillions of copies per day. So they all transmit very successfully and mutate very quickly. The bigger problem with types of viruses like hepatitis B, they're DNA viruses, so they're incorporated with the human genome.
So they attach themselves to the helix.
And they're creating something deadly and very clever called CCC DNA, or covalently binded circular DNA, which unfortunately so far we were not able to kind of attack with our existing products.
So does this mean that the virus is actually hiding within your DNA and using your DNA to replicate itself?
Exactly. They're always using our DNA to replicate their own.
Boggles my mind.
Yeah,
that's why they're very clever.
That's for hepatitis B, C, and HIV?
Applies to all of them. They're they're hijacking our own genetic materials to replicate their own, which means they're kind of stealing all the machinery available in the cells, our cells, to replicate. But for hepatitis B virus and to a large extent for HIV virus, that's the reason so far we can't cure this disease. We could suppress the viral replication very successfully.
Everything else as well.
Yeah, suppress the viral replication to an unimaginable small amounts of less than 10 copies per mil, which is very, very low. But if we stop the medication, the virus will replicate again and will spread again across the body. So that's only applicable to hepatitis B and HIV.
Okay.
Hepatitis C virus, being a RNA virus, is slightly different, does not incorporate in human genome.
It's in the ribosomes, right?
And we could really cure this virus very successfully.
You can cure this one successfully?
We can cure completely, yeah.
And just as a perspective, Hep B and C, left untreated, will kill a human in a similar way with liver failure quickly?
Sometimes, yeah. After a disease progression of something like 20 years, it's, of course, very much individual based on your gender, the age of initial infection, your immune response initially, and many other factors which are related to your liver health, like your diet, whether you're obese or not, because this will be related to processes in your liver like steatosis, in kind of accumulation of fat in your liver. So there are many different factors that are important for this chronic viral disease progression. But in general, after 20 years, you could expect some kind of a really deadly consequences like cirrhosis, further down end-stage liver disease, and then unfortunately, if you don't have the ability to, or available liver transplantation services available, you will die.
That's left untreated.
If left untreated.
Okay. And sexual transmission is the number one way of getting all three of those?
Sexual transmission is, let's say, very important and probably still leading for hepatitis B and for, let's say, HIV, specifically in let's say, something like 50% of the patient. Hepatitis C, it's definitely transferred better in terms of blood products or intravenous drug use.
Okay.
It differs between viruses and between countries, but I think nowadays the leading population in terms of new patients for HIV in the UK is the homosexual men, or MSMs, like we name them. So there are something like for the last year, 2010, 3,000 new patients were identified in the UK
for hepatitis C,
which is for HIV, which is the highest ever figure in history.
Really,
you know what I find quite interesting, Brian, is so these viruses, they're just organisms on a different scale to us, right? The same way we're on a different scale to like an elephant or a whale, right? And just because, and they're trying to survive, replicate, and propagate on the planet the same way we are, and so we're kind of in this like competition with them. And
he said hepatitis B was craftier. Is that what you said?
It's definitely a difficult enemy to combat.
I mean, this might sound like a stupid question, but how sentient do you think these viruses actually are? I mean, what do they respond to? Is it just light or temperature, or how do they? I mean, when you guys actually look at the virus under the microscope, can you elicit some sort of response from that little organism, or what is it? Does this question make sense?
It's widely. It probably needs some kind of clarification. You're referring to their kind of ability to think, to be intelligent?
I mean, because you used the word intelligent. You said the hepatitis B was more intelligent. So I'm asking, I mean, I'm not expecting anyone to be able to have a conversation with it, but it's like, what is it? Does it respond to any stimuli, or is it just simply this thing just replicates, or what is it? Does this make sense?
In theory, we can't speak about, of course, my expression was something like a joke, but we can't speak about something like intelligence, but they are very well suited to the environment, and they across all those years or centuries, they've developed in a logical for them direction to be, more prepared to spread effectively, more prepared to be resistant to antivirals or other negative factors, and in general to survive. What it's probably not that clever. The virus in general should, theoretically, coming from human perspective, should be able to avoid killing the host, because when the host is dead, the virus will die as well. Yeah. But that's, of course, not something that they will be doing intentionally,
right?
Unfortunately for us.
They won't be doing.
So, yeah, in this respect, the best, from viral perspective, the best virus should be able to spread and replicate without killing or without damaging substantially its host.
Because it's in its interest to keep the host alive.
Yeah, kind of living in a normal and based on a mutual respect relationship. But that's of course just a joke.
I'm reminded of, as a scientist, you'll probably say that there's absolutely no validity to this, and I'm not making a judgment either way. But I remember watching an interview with a homosexual gentleman. This took place in the 90s, if I'm not mistaken. I watched this interview with him, and he had been living with the virus for 20 or 30 years or something. My figures must be wrong, but he'd been living with it for a long time, and he hadn't started to display any of the symptoms of full-blown HIV. And he said what he did is he made an agreement with the virus. He said, like, look, you need me and I need you. And I don't know if he's still alive today or what, but I found that interesting. It's probably bullshit, but
probably just a great psychological way of dealing with
exactly
his entity.
It's probably from a population of relatively well-described slow progressors. Unfortunately, this is a minority of HIV patients. I mean, it's less than 5%, where the disease progression is really, really very slow, even to an extent that probably some of these patients will probably die from some other reasons and will never reach this kind of treatment initiations kind of triggering values in relation to their CD4 counts and the viral loads, because being a chronic viral disease, nowadays scientific community is recommending a specific points when the disease progression is considered important enough to initiate treatment. So not each and every newly diagnosed HIV patient will start treatment tomorrow.
They won't necessarily.
And for this population that we've just described, this probably will even never happen, or will happen very late.
If you had to give one piece of advice for people listening as far as trying to prevent the transfer of all three of those, HIV, hepatitis B and C, what would you say to people?
In general, I know that this type of advice is coming from healthcare professionals don't have a huge chance to be, how to say, followed immediately, because the typical advice of, let's say, safe sex was obviously out there for a number of years, but it's still definitely not followed, and still sexual transmission of, let's say, HIV is a leading one, and so on. But in general, safe sex is extremely important for those three completely different viruses. Another thing that is very much important, it's still, let's say, something like half of the British population with hepatitis C is from the intravenous, is well identified as being intravenous drug users.
Okay. So clean needles.
Yeah, without judging anybody's behavior, clean needles extremely important. And there are services available across this country, at least, and these services are providing clean needles and actually all the other things you need to inject in a relatively safe way. I'm not referring to the harm of the narcotics itself. It will be always there, but at least in terms of spreading viruses, every effort has been done not to encourage this.
You know what they do in this country? It's one of the things I really admire about the British social system is how well developed it is. You can walk into pretty much any pharmacy and you can ask them for something called the blue pack, right?
Okay.
A blue pack is it's a package of clean needles, alcohol swabs, a little plastic box that you can dispose of your needle in. So you pop your needle in and then you can't take it back out, so you can throw it away safely. And I mean, I know this because I've got this friend who's a bodybuilder, and like one time I was walking with him, he's like, oh, I just need to get a blue pack, right? And I was like, what do you mean? So he's like, come with me. We went into this pharmacy and he said, I need a blue pack. And the woman looked at him, and I think she looked at him funny because most of the people who walk in there are probably junkies, who like and this guy like only eats organic beef and he's got like a 3% body fat, like specimen of health,
right.
But still they gave it to him for free.
For free?
Yeah, for free.
Interesting.
And that's amazing, man. This is a very cool country to live in.
That is a good way to prevent.
It's yeah, definitely. But there are some weaknesses at the same time. And while it's my personal opinion, I guess, I believe that HIV services are really well developed and are providing an excellent care, which is probably leading the world. It's not exactly the same for the care available for hepatitis C and hepatitis B. It's very much we are lagging behind compared to other European countries in terms of number of diagnosed on a basis of the suspected number of infected, and at the same time on a basis of number of patients on treatment compared to the whole number of diagnosed. So we are definitely, there is a huge room for improvement, and this is something that we believe in the focus of the current government and definitely in the focus of existing scientific associations like BVHG and BASO here in this country.
Dimitar, let me ask you a question. What is your favorite thing about London? What do you miss most about Bulgaria?
It's an interesting question.
How long have you been here?
I've been here for the last 7 years and more or less enjoyed every minute. Definitely not homesick. I'm missing my friends and my family mostly. I would appreciate, if of course possible, to see mountains from my window, but it's highly unlikely.
From anywhere, really.
Highly unlikely that this type of development, will happen in London in a foreseeable future. So that's the only thing probably that I'm missing. Of course, that there is no need to mention the weather. It's not
pretty
ideal.
crappy, huh?
Sunny day.
Not ideal. Yeah, but today is a lovely day.
We've had a good year of weather, funny enough. It's been pretty dry and pretty sunny. And no snow so far, but yeah. Okay.
One of my mates is joking about Kyoto Protocol, if you remember one of the first big meetings about climate change.
Yes, yeah.
So he's telling me always, I don't know what exactly they've decided, but I get it right this time because we've never seen so much snow in the UK and we've never seen so much sunshine during the summer. So climate is definitely changing.
It is
Whether
changing.
it's definitely warming, I don't know.
They're supposedly growing wine now in southern UK, which could have never happened 30 years ago. So Bulgaria, just missing friends, that's all.
Yeah. Of course, it would be probably an overestimation if I said there is nothing that I'm missing from typical Bulgarian things like food, music, and if you want slightly different understanding about the seriousness of life. It's one of these typical Mediterranean type of countries which are traditionally associated with more or less laid back culture. Okay. Nothing is that much of importance. Everything could happen tomorrow. Do you know this famous joke about one of the greatest ever Bulgarian football players called Stoichkov? You probably remember this chap. He was playing probably until 10 years ago. So his greatest moments were with Barcelona in Spain. Okay. He was a part of the previous great Barcelona team, probably 10 years ago. So in this joke, he's chatting to his mate from Brazil called Romario, and they were explaining some specific perceptions for, let's say, Spanish and Bulgarians. And Romario is asking Stoichkov what exactly tomorrow means in Bulgarian. The actual expression is "Ei sega," but of course I don't expect you to speak Bulgarian. Probably, actually, you could to a certain extent. And he said, "Ej сега," which means something will happen tomorrow. It's exactly the same like Spanish mañana, but without this sense of urgency. So this probably puts things into perspective.
It's interesting. That's a good perspective. You know, before you got here, we were talking about Americans, and the work ethic, because BMS is traditionally an American company, even though it is a global company. And we were talking about the quote-unquote American work ethic, and I told him that the first 2-week vacation I ever took was after I got to the UK after 2 years. And before that, in America, you would never take a 2-week vacation because it's almost a sign of weakness. Or you said earlier, it's a sign that maybe something's drastically wrong with you if you do that. And even if you are away, you're expected to be on your BlackBerry and all that stuff.
It's worse in Japan even.
That's it.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? But then the studies show that they're not any more productive. They're just working harder.
Not smarter.
Do you agree with that?
Coming from, once again, this typical medical perspective or evidence-based data, I would like to see some kind of reasonable comparison, let's say, between comparable Japanese, American, and European population, given their absolutely different culture and different, to a degree, work ethic.
I would argue
Which
that
one
the
will be
GDP,
more
the
successful?
GDP is, or per capita GDP is that metric that
Theoretically, yeah, but it's a kind of a very composite endpoint with lots of other factors being involved in calculating GDP.
I thought I read something about productivity, as in like what a worker can accomplish in an hour. And apparently, even with France, with the 35-hour work week, those hours were more productive than the Americans, because they were saying, okay, they've had their vacation, they're relaxed, they're putting in those 7 hours a day. You know, the Americans responding to a BlackBerry at 2 in the morning doesn't make it more productive. But a buddy of mine's an investment banker in New York, and we went to Ibiza on vacation, and he was on his goddamn BlackBerry most of the time. And I was like, dude, first of all, you're not present, so I don't even like being around you. And he said, dude, my clients expect a response within 2 hours. He's like, I'm their investment banker. They want to buy and sell companies, and this is the way I have to do it. This is my job, and that's end of discussion. And you know, I understand it. I wouldn't want to. I don't think I could do that.
Yeah, not me.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a simplistic view, but let's say in the disease area we were describing previously, chronic hepatitis, HIV, most of the new products, let's say in the last 10 years, came from either American and European pharmaceutical companies, so very little development coming from Japan, which we've always considered to be a very, technically developed country, well prepared for almost everything. And that's being said, it's not because their healthcare system is not good. It's not that their patients are not equally well treated, but just looking into creativity part of the equation, it seems that at least in this disease area, once again, I don't know about cardiovascular, neuroscience, or other types of really important diseases, in viral diseases, I'm not aware of any meaningful development being driven by Japanese pharma companies.
And so are you, in a roundabout way, making the point that that might be due to a lack of creativity on their part, or?
Don't know, really don't know. Might be because this is not considered to be of major importance for them in terms of business drivers. Might be because they don't consider this specific problem to be of major importance for Japanese population, or probably because their tremendous work ethics and discipline is kind of going ahead or against the creativity. But this is, of course, largely unknown, so this is pure speculation.
Interesting. We only have a few minutes left, guys. I just wanted to ask, if there's one thing you want to accomplish in the next, say, 10 years at your job, or assuming you're doing this, what would it be? Even if it's slightly unrealistic, what would you like to see?
Yeah. You know, Brian, probably that very close to my heart. Family member is now devoted to life coaching and career coaching.
Okay.
And even without her influence, I was previously involved in a couple of coaching events organized by my company, and they are always asking for your life statement, your purpose in life. And albeit these things being kind of difficult to establish, mine was that I would like to help this company and scientific community in general to move from HIV, where we are currently able to offer really great medical care, to transfer the same amount of success in a specific BMS, of course, settings, to hepatitis C, which is a gradually evolving, very, very interesting disease area with more than 30 compounds now in development in phase 2 and phase 3. So that's really my personal target. I would like to be a witness of a new dawn of hepatitis C care, when we will be able to cure, compared to 50% today, probably 80 and 90% of the patients in the next 5 years.
Is it a PR campaign to a certain extent? I mean, everyone knows about HIV and AIDS, and it's the new disease. Well, not new, but I mean, is it a PR to a certain extent? I mean, hepatitis C, I wouldn't say many people know about.
Not really, because I've mentioned already the global figures. Let's say in the UK, we have something like 90,000 patients with HIV. At the same time, we have an excess of 200,000 patients with Hep C.
Wow.
So it's not new. It's not that it was not known, but let's say the public noise and the attention of society was very much in favor of HIV so far.
Right.
Now this is changing gradually, with other chronic viral diseases being considered of importance, and for the very right reasons. Figures speaks for themselves.
Wow. And you want to ask before we sign off? From,
I mean,
you want to take a nap after all that knowledge?
Take a nap. I just want to process it all.
I would love to come and spend a day at work with you and just see what your daily routine is. I mean, maybe I am asking, actually.
It's probably not that sexy, like we've
Most
mentioned
jobs aren't,
before,
I guess.
because definitely no space kind of environment or lab work. I'm not necessarily a scientist. I'm working in general in medical affairs, which is a kind of a mixture of clinical research, specific support for marketing, and definitely related to all sorts of other things like compliance, drug safety, and so on. So it's a kind of a composite science, which is here in the UK a special separated specialty called pharmaceutical medicine. But definitely guys in labs are in close contact with us, and we are driving this forward together.
Okay. Wow, well, it's really a pleasure having you on. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much, guys.
I think it was very specific, but I think a lot of our viewers will be blown away by this, because it's really interesting stuff. So thank you much, and
it's about the journey.
And what a journey it is.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys next week.
Thank you, guys.